Hey everybody, it's Rob from Man Sewing, and I've got a great tutorial for you today. Yeah, that's right. We're going to keep playing with our skateboards a little bit, and if you haven't caught the first few tutorials we have out on skateboards, there should be some links down below here for you. But remember, we were playing with these fun three-dimensional skateboards that I made as raw edge applique at the end of the tutorial I did with Jenny Doan. Well, then we came back and we did some actual applique onto fabric for you. Well, let's talk about today how we're going to anchor down those applique. So that's right. This technique, or the three techniques I'm going to show, will work for any kind of raw edge or fusible web applique. We're going to do some blanket stitching, we're going to do some satin stitching, and just a little bit with free motion machine quilting, and that should give you some great ways to hold down any of your appliques. So I bet you're ready to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I've already prepared a sample. This is the blanket stitch, and you probably have to look around these wheels here. The wheel you can see, and a blanket stitch, you do it with your feed dogs up. You have your standard presser foot on, or it's got a nice wide zigzag opening, and most of the time the stitch is going to do something like this. It's going to go down, over, back, down, over, back. Sometimes it'll take two legs and then over and back. You don't want much bite to go into your applique, and then that straight edge of the thread is going to run right along the edge of your applique perimeter there. Now this will make it somewhat washable, not completely washable like the satin stitch, the second version I'm going to show you, but this will certainly hold the appliques down, and then you don't have to quilt the appliques themselves. So to do this, you also notice probably I have some paper. And I've actually stitched through the paper. I often use recycled paper. And I stitch through the paper because the paper acts like a stabilizer. And then I will tear this away after I'm done. So let's get started on that applique portion of it, or the anchoring of the applique, right? And so I'm going to use this little board here. And I probably have almost enough paper, well, at least enough to get started. And I'm just going to go around the tail of this board for you so you can see how I'm doing it. Now, the machine has already been set up for the blanket stitch, and I'm using roughly a 2.5 millimeter bite into the applique, and about a, what do I have this thing set at about a 1 millimeter drop of the stitch, or 1 millimeter leg over, and then bite into it, or stitch length 1, width 2.5. There you go. That's what I'm looking for. Now, you probably want to do a couple of test runs on this, and if I am lucky right now, my needle is in the position where it's on the down leg. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this down nice and slow, and then what's happening is the needle's coming down and then it bites in, and it's going to swing over and bite down and bite down. And now what I'm doing is I'm watching the stroke of the length of the stitch, and that's just following the edge of my applique as I go. If you need to pivot, it's best to pivot right before the bite. So you kind of want to time it out, and at this point you would want to have a needle down. Then you could pivot your fabric slightly just like that, right? And then you could bounce it over for the bite. So blanket stitches are great, but they're a little tough on the corners, and they actually give you a little bit more of a visually blocky look. So these, if you haven't ever seen a real blanket stitch, think of your Sunbonnet Sue quilts. Sunbonnet Sue is often blanket stitched in position, okay? So conversely, the satin stitch is a little bit easier to do arcs and rounded areas with, because it doesn't look as blocky or chunky because it's not doing a series of straight lines like this is. But this is a very effective way to hold your applique down. Let me finish this out so you can see what I've done. And as I'm coming into the finish, and one bite if I'm lucky, and a stop. There we go. Okay, so now as I pull this out, let me set it down nice, and you can see how that just curves nice and around there. That's holding the applique down, right? I've stitched through the paper there. Nice tension. So that is the first and one of the easier ways to hold your applique down, known as the blanket stitch. And some of your machines actually may not have a true perpendicular blanket stitch that looks like this. Some of them have a little bit of a V, kind of a blind hem stitch, and you can certainly use that as well. Okay, so let's move along quickly here because I'm having fun today. The next one I want to show you is going to be the satin stitching. Okay, now with the satin stitching here, here's my example. Okay, let me set that down so I'm not moving it all over the camera for you. The satin stitching, as you can see, is a nice tight little, it's a zigzag, right? You just put your machine in zigzag mode and you're gonna really shorten down your stitch length. So right now I've chosen a 0.4 stitch length and a 2.5 millimeter stitch width. Okay, again, practice on something if you haven't done this before, and I'm still doing it through paper. And I also wanted to show you, I got a little overzealous, but the paper just peels off really nice because the stitching is kind of perforating as you go. So you will remove all of your paper, but you can see how easy that comes out, right? Okay, and the satin stitching itself actually requires more of a stabilizer or more of a paper than the actual excuse me, I'm looking for my parts, than the actual blanket stitching, because the satin stitching tends the fabric to draw up a little bit more. Okay, so let's go ahead and satin stitch this bad boy. I've just grabbed another piece of binder paper. I don't know if any of you out there are Costco fans, but I've been told that the printer paper at Costco is really flimsy and therefore it makes great stabilizer. Haha. Okay. Now I'm just watching this. Now what I'm looking at is there is a little line right down the center of my foot. And on that line, the needle is actually zigging and zagging over that line. So the line is actually on the division where the fabric and the applique meet. Okay, so that's all I have to watch. And it's just like driving your Oldsmobile down the road. You're not looking at the hood ornament, you're looking down the road, right? And for me, I find with a little bit quicker pace on my machine, it's a little easier to control. But I'm still going around the tail of that board for you. One of the tricks I find with satin stitching is every now and again, I get myself in a position where it would be easier if I was heading backwards. So I've actually learned you can lock your machine into reverse and satin stitch backwards sometimes. It gets you out of those points or those tight corners, literally. The 2.5 millimeter zigzag is pretty narrow. If you find that your fabric is kind of shredding underneath your needle, you can always go with a little thicker or wider, like a 3.0 satin stitch, right? And then the other thing I'll point out with the satin stitching is, as you probably saw, and with the blanket stitching too, I'm always using the same color bobbin thread as I'm using for the top, because if you have any little tension discrepancies, you don't want to see the thread from the bottom side of the project coming up to the top, because it will always show that way. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of the satin stitching. It's real simple. Again, take it slow and work your way around the corners, right? And you can see, again, it's stitching right through the paper there. And if I'll point out real close here, at first I was a little bit off my line, and that's what I mean by you can see the fabric kind of blowing out. So let's say that happened to you. This is the first time you've ever satin stitched. That happens, and I was on a 2.5. I'm just gonna kick that up to like a 3.0 or maybe a 3.5. Fix that corner and then do the rest of the entire quilt with a 3.5. And like I said, a lot of sewing machines are set up completely differently. So these are the numbers I'm using. Experiment until you have it just the way you want it. Now, gotten a lot of requests to have people watch me do my free motion work, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second, but I have to let you know, this is free motion on the applique, so I'm not going to be teaching a bunch of crazy stuff and drills and things, but those things are also coming down the line for you. So let's get ready for our free motion, and as I bring the free motion around, I'm just going to point out a couple of things. I probably should still throw a couple safety pins in here to baste it. I'm not too worried about that because it's such a small sample, and I am just doing this as a demonstration. I'm not doing this for the real quilt. If this was the real quilt, all of my blocks would be assembled, and then I would do the borders, then I'd put the batting, I'd really baste it, and then I would do what I'm going to show you here in a second. But there is, just so you know, backing fabric, some cotton batting, and then the actual skateboard applique that's going to get free motion quilted here. Let me take a second and set up the machine. I'll be right back with you. Okay, I'm back. Did you miss me? Now, check this out. I want to tell you what I've done. I've got a fun little quick tip out there already about doing a lot with the different kinds of free motion feet. But just so you know, with free motion, we're going to reach around and we're going to drop our feed dogs, okay? And then I've got a specialty foot that's going to come up and down with the stroke of the needle. And like all quilting, we should start in the middle of our quilt and work our way towards the outer edges. So I'm going to start in the middle of this deck. And then my goal is to try to run that stitch line right along the edge about a needle's thickness, a sewing machine needle's thickness in from the outer edge. I don't want to hit right on the edge because then the glue will kind of splinter apart, and I don't want to come in too far because then over time the applique will start to curl up and look untidy. So if this is free motion quilting, I'm going to lock in my stitch, and then I'm going to begin sewing, and I'm in charge of all my stitch length, and this one I have a hard time talking through. But you can see how much faster I can go, and let's say I wanted to carve around into here so that now I can get onto my trucks. Free motion, you're going to try to keep it a little bit more consistent in what you're doing. And I like to try to not stop my thread or start and stop too many times. And you can also add character with free motion quilting. So just a reminder, I have to control the speed of my hands and the speed of my stitch, and it's almost impossible to talk while doing it. It's one of the only times I'm quiet in my life. But you can see how quickly you can get some serious territory covered. Okay, let me just stop that. And this has got a cool thread cutter on it, so it's going to cut my thread. Okay, and let's bring this here where you can see it. And now the reason I like the free motion quilting a little bit is, I don't know if you can tell, but it's already starting to loft and pucker because of the way I've stitched this. And then, like I said, I can add some character and detail into the parts and pieces of whatever the applique is. Of course, this one, it's the wheels and trucks and the hardware that we've got set up for you there. So those are the three basics to how to anchor your raw edge or your fusible applique. You've got your blanket stitch, your satin stitch, and your free motion quilting. And I think the quilts look the best when there's a whole variety of all of them included. So I hope that gave you a little more of the information you were asking for. And until we see you next time, this is Man Sewing.